When bullies target the maid's daughter at an elite school, they think she's defenseless, until they learn her silence hides the precision of a black belt. 14-year-old Amelia Vance was the kind of student no one noticed. She kept her head down, spoke softly, and moved through the marble halls of Northgate Preparatory Academy like a shadow. To most, she was just the maid's daughter, quiet, harmless, forgettable. But what no one saw was the strength behind that silence. Amelia was a black belt in karate, trained by her late grandfather, Sergeant Major Daniel Peterson, a war hero who taught her that true power lives in restraint. So when a group of privileged bullies mocked her mother and crossed the line from arrogance to cruelty, Amelia didn't raise her voice. She stood her ground. And what started as a moment of humiliation ended as a lesson in respect. This is the story of how a maid's daughter, and a soldier's granddaughter, reminded a school built on power what true honor really means. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Enjoy the story. The quietest girl in the hallway carried the loudest legacy. 14-year-old Amelia Vance moved through Northgate Preparatory Academy like a whisper. Her silence was not shyness, but a shield, and no one knew it was forged by a legend. The morning sun, pale and thin, struggled to warm the polished floors of Northgate Prep. It was a place of inherited confidence and expensive shoes. Students moved in loud, cheerful packs, their laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged corridors. They were the children of lawyers, doctors, and executives. Their futures felt as solid and guaranteed as the marble pillars that held up the entrance. Amelia Vance was not one of them. She walked alone, her worn backpack a stark contrast to the designer bags that swung from other shoulders. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple, neat ponytail. It was practical, not a statement. Her eyes, a soft gray, were usually fixed on the floor or on the pages of a book. She had learned early that visibility was a liability. To be seen was to be judged. To be judged was to invite trouble. So, she perfected the art of being invisible. Her mother, Carol Vance, worked at the school. She wasn't a teacher or an administrator. She was part of the cleaning staff. Every gleaming floor, every smudge-free window, every polished brass plaque was a testament to her mother's hard work. Amelia felt a fierce, quiet pride in her mother's labor. It was honest work. It was dignified work. But here, at Northgate, it was a source of shame for others to point at. The first bell shrieked, and Amelia slipped into her history class just as the final chime faded. She took her usual seat in the back corner. It offered a clear view of the room and, more importantly, kept her back to the wall. It was a habit her grandfather had taught her long ago. Always know what's behind you. Mia, his voice would echo in her memory, warm and steady like a slow river. Mr. Harrison, a kind-faced man with a passion for the past, began the lesson. He spoke of ancient heroes and forgotten battles. Amelia listened intently. History was her favorite subject. It was a story of cause and effect, of quiet actions leading to loud consequences. It made sense to her. The trouble started, as it often did, with Brett Thompson. Brett was the unofficial king of Northgate's sophomore class. He was tall, with the easy confidence of a boy who had never been told no in his life. His father was a prominent attorney, a man whose name was on a bronze plaque in the school's main lobby, right next to the list of major donors. Brett moved through the school with two shadows, Chad and Kyle. They were less his friends and more his court jesters, always ready with a laugh or a shove to please their leader. Today, their attention fell on Amelia. Mr. Harrison asked a question about the Spartan stand at Thermopylae. No hands went up. The silence stretched. Mr. Harrison's eyes scanned the room, landing on Amelia. Amelia? Any thoughts on the strategic importance of holding the pass? Amelia's voice, when she spoke, was soft but clear. It wasn't just about strategy. It was about honor. Buying time for the rest of Greece to prepare was the goal, but dying for that cause was the message. It showed that they would not surrender, no matter the cost. Mr. Harrison smiled. Excellent, Amelia. Precisely. It was a symbolic victory born from a tactical defeat. From 2 rows ahead, a low snicker broke the classroom's focus. It was Brett. He turned slightly in his seat, his mouth twisted in a smirk. Honor, he whispered to Chad, just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. What would she know about honor? Her mom scrubs toilets for a living. Chad and Kyle erupted in muffled laughter. A few other students giggled nervously. Heat bloomed on Amelia's cheeks, a hot, unwelcome blush. Her hands, resting on her desk, curled into tight fists under the wood. Her grandfather's words rose in her mind again. Control, Mia. Anger is a weapon. You don't draw a weapon unless you intend to use it. And you never, ever use it without a just cause. Scrubbing toilets was not a just cause. It was a stupid, cruel remark from a boy who mistook money for worth. Amelia unclenched her fists, digit by digit. She took a slow, silent breath, in through her nose, out through her mouth. She imagined the anger as a cloud of black smoke, and she watched it drift away. She looked at Brett, her gray eyes meeting his for a brief moment. She didn't glare. She didn't frown. Her expression was perfectly neutral. It was this unnerving stillness that bothered Brett the most. He expected tears or a stammered retort. He got nothing. It was like throwing a rock at a lake and seeing no ripples. He turned back around, annoyed. The moment passed. Mr. Harrison, who had heard the remark, shot Brett a warning look but moved on with the lesson. He knew fighting that battle in front of the class would only make things worse for Amelia. The rest of the day unfolded in its usual quiet rhythm for Amelia. She ate her lunch alone in a small courtyard, reading a book. She avoided the crowded cafeteria, with its noise and its hierarchies. She navigated the hallways between classes with practiced efficiency, her head down, her path sure. She was a ship charting a safe course through dangerous waters. After the final bell, Amelia's routine was different from everyone else's. She didn't head for the sports fields or the student parking lot. She went to the small janitorial closet on the first floor where her mother kept her supplies. The door was slightly ajar. She could hear her mother humming softly inside. "Hi, Mom," Amelia said, pushing the door open. Carol Vance turned, her face lighting up. She was a woman in her late 30s, but exhaustion had etched fine lines around her eyes. Her hands were rough from chemicals and hard work, but her smile was the gentlest thing Amelia had ever known. "There's my girl," Carol said, wiping her hands on her blue work smock. "Good day." "It was fine," Amelia lied. It was always fine. She would never burden her mother with the small cruelties of Northgate. Her mother already carried so much. "I just have to finish this hallway and the main lobby," Carol said, gesturing with her chin. "You can wait for me in the library. Get a head start on your homework." "Okay," Amelia said. "Or I can help you." Carol shook her head immediately. "No, ma'am. Your job is school. My job is this. You get the grades, you go to college, and you never have to smell like bleach for a living. That's the deal." It was a familiar conversation, their well-worn pact. Amelia's success was her mother's mission. Amelia went to the library, a grand, two-story room with towering shelves and stained glass windows. She found a secluded corral and opened her history textbook, but her mind wasn't on the Peloponnesian War. It was on Brett's sneering face. It was on the feeling of shame, hot and sharp, that she had pushed down so carefully. She stayed there for nearly 2 hours, the silence of the library a soothing balm. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, she packed her things and went to meet her mother. She found her in the grand lobby, a vast, echoing space with a floor of black and white checkered marble. The plaque with the Thompson family name gleamed under the recessed lighting. Carol was on her hands and knees, meticulously polishing a stubborn scuff mark near the main entrance. Her movements were slow, weary. The whole building was empty now, save for them and perhaps a few late-working teachers. The silence made the scene feel more intimate, more raw. Amelia's heart ached. Her mother deserved so much more than this. She deserved a home where she didn't have to work 2 jobs, a life where her back didn't ache every single night. "I'm done, Mom," Amelia said softly. Carol looked up, startled. "Oh, honey, I didn't hear you." She pushed herself up, groaning slightly as her knees popped. "Okay, let's go home. I'm dreaming of a hot bath and my fuzzy slippers." As they walked toward the exit, a set of side doors burst open. Brett, Chad, and Kyle stumbled in, laughing loudly. They were dressed in their football practice gear, their faces flushed with sweat. They hadn't expected to see anyone, and they stopped short when they saw Amelia and her mother. Brett's eyes raked over Carol's work smock, her bucket of dirty water, her tired face. His smirk returned. Well, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look what we have here. The Queen and her princess." Carol's back stiffened. She placed a protective hand on Amelia's shoulder. "It's late, boys. You should be heading home." Her voice was polite but firm. She had dealt with entitled boys like this her whole life. "We were just leaving," Chad said, nudging Brett. He seemed uncomfortable, but Brett was enjoying himself. He took a step closer, looking down at the floor Carol had just finished polishing. "You missed a spot," he said, and then deliberately dragged the muddy cleat of his football shoe across the pristine marble, leaving a long, ugly black streak. Kyle snickered. Chad looked at the floor, then at Amelia, and said nothing. Carol's face tightened, but she didn't say a word. She knew that reacting would only escalate the situation. It was a lesson learned through years of quiet servitude. You swallow your pride. You do the job. You go home. But Amelia was not her mother. She watched the mud smear across the floor. She saw the flash of hurt and humiliation in her mother's eyes before it was quickly hidden away. And in that moment, the careful control she had maintained all day, all year, began to crack. This wasn't just a stupid remark anymore. This was a direct act of disrespect to her mother. It was a deliberate defiling of her hard work, done for no other reason than to be cruel. Her grandfather's voice was in her head, but this time it was different. There is a time for patience and a time for action. The wisdom is in knowing the difference. A true warrior protects the innocent. They stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. Her mother was innocent, and Amelia would stand for her. "Clean it up," Amelia said. The words left her mouth before she had even fully decided to speak. They hung in the silent lobby, quiet but heavy as stone. Brett turned to her, his eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Amelia said, stepping forward, out from under her mother's protective hand. "You made the mess. Clean it up." Her stance had shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. Her feet were shoulder-width apart. Her weight was balanced perfectly. Her hands were loose at her sides, not clenched. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. She was no longer a whisper. She was a presence. Brett let out a short, sharp laugh. "You're kidding me, right? Your mommy's the help. It's her job." He took a menacing step toward her, using his height to try and intimidate her. "You need to learn your place, both of you." "Brett, come on, man," Chad said, grabbing his arm. "Let's just go." Brett shook him off. His ego was on the line now. He couldn't be seen backing down from the maid's quiet little daughter. He jabbed a finger toward Amelia's face. "You've got a big mouth for a nobody. Maybe I should teach you some respect." Carol gasped. "Leave her alone. We don't want any trouble." "Then you should have taught your daughter some manners," Brett sneered. He looked back at Amelia, his eyes filled with malice. He expected her to flinch, to shrink back. Instead, she just stood there, watching him, waiting. Her calmness was infuriating. It felt like a challenge. "I'm not going to ask you again," Amelia said, her voice dangerously low. "Clean it up." That was it. Brett's temper snapped. The thrill of power, the rage at her defiance, the cruelty that had been simmering all day, all boiled over. With a roar of frustration, he lunged, his hand reaching out to grab the front of her shirt. It was a clumsy, angry movement. For Amelia, time seemed to slow down. She saw the lunge begin. She saw the muscles in his shoulder tense. She saw the intent in his eyes. Her body reacted before her mind had a chance to second-guess it. It was pure muscle memory, drilled into her over thousands of hours in a small, dusty dojo with her grandfather. She didn't step back. She stepped in. As Brett's hand shot forward, Amelia pivoted on the ball of her left foot. Her body moved a few scant inches to the side, just enough for his grasping hand to find only empty air. As his momentum carried him past her, she brought her right hand up, not in a fist, but with her fingers held stiff and straight together. It wasn't a punch. It was a strike, a precise, economical movement. She struck the cluster of nerves just below his outstretched arm, where the shoulder meets the chest. To an onlooker, it looked like a simple tap, almost gentle. But the effect was instantaneous and shocking. A jolt of pure, electric pain shot down Brett's arm. His fingers went numb. His arm went completely limp, useless at his side. A strangled grunt escaped his lips, a sound of profound surprise and agony. His forward momentum, now completely unchecked, sent him stumbling sideways. He tripped over his own feet and crashed heavily onto the marble floor he had just defiled. He landed with a loud, hollow thud that echoed through the vast lobby. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Chad and Kyle stared, their mouths hanging open. They had seen Brett get into fights before. He always won. He was big, strong, and aggressive. They had never seen him taken down. They certainly had never seen him taken down with a single touch by a 14-year-old girl who weighed half what he did. Carol stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. She looked from the gasping, whimpering boy on the floor to her own daughter. She was looking at Amelia, but it was as if she was seeing a stranger. Amelia stood perfectly still, her breathing even, her expression calm. She looked down at Brett, who was now clutching his arm, his face pale with shock and pain. "I believe you dropped this," she said, her voice perfectly level, gesturing to the rag that had fallen from her mother's hand. Then she turned her gaze to Chad and Kyle. They both flinched and took an involuntary step back, raising their hands as if to ward her off. They looked at her not as the quiet maid's daughter, but as something else entirely, something they couldn't understand and didn't want to challenge. The moment stretched on, thick with tension and confusion. The king of Northgate Prep was lying on the floor, defeated. His court jesters were terrified, and the ghost of the hallways had just shown them all that she was very, very real. The story of what happened next would depend on who you asked. But for Amelia, it was simple. A line had been crossed, and she had held it. Amelia did not feel the surge of adrenaline she expected. There was no triumph, no satisfaction. There was only a cold, quiet certainty, the same feeling she got when she perfectly executed a difficult kata. It was the feeling of a problem being resolved through precise application of a principle. The principle, in this case, was one her grandfather had repeated until it was part of her DNA. The purpose of your strength is not to win fights. It is to end them. Brett was still on the floor, trying to push himself up with his good arm. His face was a mask of confusion. The pain was real, a deep, throbbing ache. But it was the humiliation that truly crippled him. He, Brett Thompson, had been laid out by her. He couldn't even process it. What did you do to me?" he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. Amelia simply looked at him. She offered no explanation. Explaining the technique would be like explaining a sunset to a blind man. It was pointless. It was Carol who broke the spell. "Amelia." Her voice was a sharp, frightened whisper. She rushed to her daughter's side, grabbing her arm. "What have you done? We have to go. Now." Fear was radiating from her mother in waves. It was a different kind of fear than the one Brett's friends were feeling. Theirs was the fear of the unknown. Carol's was the fear of the consequences. She knew how this world worked. A boy like Brett, with a father like his, did not end up on the losing side of any conflict without severe repercussions for the other party, especially when the other party was them. "Mom, it's okay," Amelia said, her voice softening, trying to soothe her. "No, it is not okay," Carol insisted, her eyes darting toward the main office, as if expecting the principal and a squad of police officers to appear at any moment. "They'll say you attacked him. They'll have you expelled. I'll lose my job. Amelia, do you have any idea what you've just done to us?" Her panic was understandable. Their lives were precarious, a careful balancing act of low wages and high rent, of staying invisible to stay employed. Amelia had just kicked the supports out from under them. Before Amelia could respond, Chad finally found his voice. We're just gonna go," he said, pulling Kyle by the sleeve. Kyle nodded dumbly, his eyes still fixed on Amelia. They hauled a groaning Brett to his feet and practically dragged him out of the lobby, leaving the muddy streak on the floor as the only evidence of the confrontation. As their footsteps faded, the silence that returned was heavier than before. It was filled with Carol's fear and Amelia's quiet resolve. "Where did you learn to do that?" Carol asked, her voice trembling. "I've never seen anything like it." Amelia looked at her mother, at the woman who thought she knew everything about her daughter. "Grandpa taught me," she said simply. The name hung in the air between them. Sergeant Major Daniel Sarge Peterson, Carol's father, Amelia's grandfather, a man who had been more of a myth than a memory for most of Amelia's life, gone before she was old enough to truly know him, but present in every lesson, every stance, every breath of her training. Carol's face paled. "Your grandfather, he taught you his fighting." "He called it a discipline," Amelia corrected gently. "He said it was about control, about peace." "Peace." Carol's voice rose, bordering on hysterical. "This doesn't look like peace, Amelia. This looks like a disaster. His father is a trustee of this school." They took the bus home in a strained silence. Carol stared out the window, her hands clenched in her lap. Amelia watched the city lights slide by, her mind a calm sea. She did not regret what she had done. Regret was a useless emotion. You made a choice based on the principles you lived by. You accepted the consequences. That was another one of her grandfather's lessons. Their apartment was small but meticulously clean. It smelled of lemon polish and the lavender soap Carol loved. On a small table in the living room sat a single, framed photograph. It was of a man in a crisp military uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons. He had kind eyes, but a jaw set with the hardness of forged steel. Sergeant Major Daniel Peterson. Carol went straight to the kitchen to make tea, her movements jerky and agitated. Amelia went to her room and slid a wooden box out from under her bed. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn velvet, was a black belt. It was frayed at the edges, the cotton softened with age and sweat. It had been her grandfather's. Next to it were his dog tags and a folded American flag. This was her inheritance, not money or property, but a legacy of honor, duty, and the quiet strength to uphold them. She took out the belt and tied it around the waist of her simple jeans and t-shirt. She stood in the center of her small room and began to move. She started with the first kata, the one he had taught her when she was just 6 years old. Heian Shodan, the way of peace, first level. Her movements were fluid, precise. Each block, each strike, each step was performed with an economy of motion that belied her age. This was her church. This was her meditation. The frantic energy of the day, her mother's fear, Brett's sneering face, it all faded away, replaced by the familiar rhythm of the form. She wasn't fighting an imaginary opponent. She was mastering herself, her breathing, her balance, her focus. She remembered her grandfather's dusty garage, which he had converted into a small dojo, the smell of old wood and canvas. His large, calloused hands correcting her stance. His voice, a low rumble, explaining the philosophy behind each movement. "Karate is not about hurting people, Mia," he told her, kneeling down to look her in the eye. "It's the opposite. It's about being so strong, so disciplined, that you never have to hurt anyone. You can walk away. You can de-escalate. You can protect. But you must always, always be ready to stand your ground when a line is crossed. The trick is knowing where that line is." Tonight, Brett Thompson had drawn a line in the mud on that polished marble floor. Amelia finished her katas and felt a sense of peace settle over her. The decision had been correct. The execution had been clean. Now came the consequences. The phone call came the next morning, just as Amelia was getting ready for school. It was a Saturday, but the summons was immediate. Principal Thompson, no relation to Brett, a fact that provided a small, ironic mercy, wanted to see them in his office at 10:00 sharp. Brett and his father would be there. Carol's face was ashen. "I should call in sick for you," she whispered. "We could just not go." "We have to go, Mom," Amelia said. "Running won't fix it." "Fix it? Amelia, there's no fixing this. We're going to be crucified." Amelia put on a clean, simple dress. She brushed her hair until it shone. She projected an aura of calm she didn't entirely feel, doing it more for her mother's sake than her own. As they were about to leave, she paused at the small table and looked at her grandfather's picture. She straightened the frame slightly. It felt like a silent prayer. Northgate Preparatory Academy was even more intimidating on a weekend. It was empty and silent, their footsteps echoing unnaturally in the halls. The principal's office was on the second floor, a large room with mahogany walls and leather chairs. Principal Thompson was a tall, harried-looking man who seemed perpetually caught between pleasing wealthy parents and actually running a school. He sat behind a large, imposing desk. In the chairs opposite him sat Brett and his father, Mr. Charles Thompson. Mr. Thompson was exactly what Amelia had expected: expensive suit, perfect hair, and an expression of supreme arrogance. He looked like a man who had never lost an argument, primarily because he paid to make sure he never had to have one. Brett sat beside him, his arm in a sling, a pouting, petulant look on his face. He refused to look at Amelia. "Mrs. Vance, Amelia," the principal began, his voice strained. "Thank you for coming. I'm sure you understand the gravity of this situation. My son was violently assaulted by this girl." Mr. Thompson cut in, his voice a smooth, dangerous weapon. He didn't even bother to look at Carol or Amelia, addressing the principal directly as if they weren't in the room. Unprovoked, he has a severe brachial plexus injury. The doctor said he was lucky it wasn't permanent nerve damage. I want her expelled, and I want criminal charges pressed. Carol gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Charges? It was a misunderstanding. The boys were just playing around. She was already trying to smooth things over, to minimize, to placate. Playing around? Mr. Thompson finally turned his cold eyes on her. My son is an athlete. He has scholarship prospects. This delinquent, he waved a dismissive hand toward Amelia, could have ruined his future. For what? Because he scuffed your precious floor? He threatened my daughter, Carol said, a spark of defiance flashing in her eyes. He insulted us. Words, Mr. Thompson scoffed. In response, she crippled him. The school's liability here is enormous, Principal. You have a violent student on your hands, a threat to the safety of others. What do you intend to do about it? His threat was clear. Handle this my way, or I will make the school pay. Principal Thompson looked cornered. He turned to Amelia. Amelia, your record here is perfect. You have excellent grades. You've never been in a day of trouble. This is so out of character. Is there anything you'd like to say for yourself? His tone pleaded with her to give him something, anything, to work with. An apology, an excuse, remorse. Amelia looked at the principal. Then she looked at Mr. Thompson. Finally, her gaze settled on Brett. He threatened my mother, she said, her voice even and clear. He cornered her. He deliberately destroyed her work to humiliate her. Then he lunged at me. A lie, Brett shouted, finding his voice. I just told her to watch her mouth. She attacked me out of nowhere. She's crazy. So, you're claiming self-defense, Principal Thompson said, latching onto the phrase. I am claiming that my actions were a direct and controlled response to a physical threat, Amelia corrected. The phrasing was precise. Clinical. It was the language of an incident report. Mr. Thompson let out a sound of disgust. Controlled response? She's a trained thug. Where does a girl like her even learn to do something like that? Look at her. Butter wouldn't melt. It's psychopathic. The principal sighed, looking down at his desk. The path of least resistance was obvious. Expel the maid's daughter. Appease the powerful donor. Sweep it all under the rug. He opened Amelia's student file, mostly as a stalling tactic, his fingers drumming on the manila folder. Well, Amelia, the school has a zero-tolerance policy on violence. He began, the words of her sentence already forming. It was then that Carol, who had been sitting in terrified silence, finally broke. The fear was still there, but something else was rising up to meet it, a mother's fierce, protective instinct. You will not call my daughter a thug, she said, her voice shaking but firm. She stood up, facing Mr. Thompson. Your son is a bully. He has been tormenting her for months. I have kept quiet. I have told her to keep her head down, to not make waves. I was wrong. I taught her to be afraid, but her grandfather taught her to be strong. She turned to the principal. Her grandfather was Sergeant Major Daniel Peterson, United States Army Special Forces. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. He taught Amelia everything he knew about discipline and self-control. He taught her to respect others, but he also taught her to respect herself. What she did was not an attack. It was honor. It's a word your son used as a joke yesterday. My daughter just showed him what it means. The room went completely, utterly silent. The name, Sergeant Major Daniel Peterson, had landed like a thunderclap. Principal Thompson froze, his hand hovering over Amelia's file. His eyes widened slowly. He knew that name. Everyone in this state knew that name. Daniel Peterson was a local hero, a legend. A highway was named after him. There was a bronze statue of him in the state capitol's Veterans Memorial Park. And there was, as Charles Thompson was just beginning to realize with a sickening lurch in his stomach, a small, discreet plaque in the school's own lobby, not 5 feet from his own donor plaque, commemorating Sergeant Major Peterson as a distinguished alumnus who gave his life for his country. The principal slowly closed Amelia's file. He looked at the quiet girl in the simple dress. He looked at her determined mother. He was no longer seeing a maid and her delinquent daughter. He was seeing the legacy of a national hero. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted. Mr. Thompson's arrogant smirk had vanished, replaced by a pale, waxy confusion. Harassing the granddaughter of a decorated war hero was not a winning strategy. Pressing charges against her would be a public relations catastrophe. The story would be irresistible. Wealthy lawyer's son, a known bully, assaults Medal of Honor recipient's granddaughter. He could see the headlines. His political ambitions, his social standing, it would all turn to ash. Principal Thompson cleared his throat, his demeanor transformed. He was no longer a harried administrator. He was the head of an institution that now found itself in the presence of honor. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice now carrying a new, steely authority. "I believe we need to re-examine the events of yesterday evening. We have security cameras in the main lobby. Perhaps we should review the footage." Brett's face went white. The suggestion of reviewing the security footage landed in the silent room with the force of a verdict. The camera, a silent, impartial witness, would show everything. The sneering, the deliberate act of vandalism, the lunge. It would show threat and response, cause and effect. Mr. Thompson, a man whose career was built on manipulating facts and controlling narratives, understood this instantly. The objective eye of a camera was his worst enemy. His son's story of an unprovoked attack would evaporate into a provable lie. He shot a venomous glare at Brett, who shrank in his chair. The boy's face, already pale, was now tinged with a sickly green. He knew what the camera would show. He knew he was caught. Mr. Thompson's posture changed. The aggressive lean forward was gone. He sat back, the picture of calculated retreat. He held up a hand, a gesture meant to convey magnanimity, but it trembled slightly. "That won't be necessary," he said, his voice now unnaturally smooth. I think there has been a significant misunderstanding." He turned to his son. "Brett, you failed to mention certain details." "Dad, Brett stammered, but his father cut him off with a look that was colder than any winter morning. "This is a teachable moment," Mr. Thompson announced to the room, though he was clearly speaking for his own benefit, crafting a new, more palatable version of events. "My son, in a moment of youthful indiscretion, behaved poorly. He was disrespectful. However," he added, trying to regain some leverage, "that does not excuse the level of violence used against him." Principal Thompson, emboldened by the truth and the legacy now sitting in his office, was no longer a man searching for the path of least resistance. He had found his spine. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice firm, "Amelia's file states that she is the sole heir to Sergeant Major Peterson's estate and legacy. This school has a scholarship fund in his name. He is, without question, the most distinguished alumnus in our 100-year history. Your son didn't just disrespect a fellow student and her mother. He disrespected the living memory of a national hero. In my book, a controlled response is the least of what he should have expected." He turned his attention to Brett, his eyes narrowed. "Brett, you will serve a 2-week in-school suspension. You will write a formal, handwritten letter of apology to both Mrs. Vance and Amelia. And you will personally clean and polish the entire lobby floor, under Mrs. Vance's supervision, every day after school for the next month." "What?" Brett yelped, a fresh wave of indignation washing over his fear. "That's not fair." "Fair," the principal shot back. "Fair would be me calling the police and showing them the video footage of you assaulting a minor. Would you prefer that?" Brett's mouth snapped shut. Mr. Thompson stood up, his face a tight mask of fury. He had been outmaneuvered, his power and influence rendered useless by a simple, unshakable truth. "This is not over," he hissed under his breath, a promise directed at no one and everyone. He grabbed Brett by his good arm and pulled him from the chair. "We're leaving." They stormed out of the office, the door clicking shut behind them, leaving a profound and ringing silence in their wake. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Principal Thompson let out a long, slow breath he seemed to have been holding all morning. He looked at Carol and Amelia, his expression a mixture of awe and apology. "Mrs. Vance, Amelia, on behalf of Northgate Preparatory Academy, I am profoundly sorry. For what you have endured, for my own hesitation, for all of it. Your grandfather was a great man. It is clear his legacy is in strong, capable hands." He looked at Amelia with a newfound respect. "Amelia, any disciplinary action against you is, of course, dropped. Please, let me know if you or your mother experience any further trouble from anyone. My door is always open." Carol, who had been standing rigid this whole time, finally seemed to wilt with relief. Tears welled in her eyes as she sank back into her chair. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Amelia simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She felt a quiet sense of justice, but it was muted. This victory felt complicated. She had not wanted this attention. She had not wanted her grandfather's name to be used as a shield. His legacy was something sacred, private. Now it was a public spectacle, a weapon in a war she never wanted to fight. The walk home was different from the bus ride the night before. The tense silence was replaced by a dazed disbelief. Carol kept looking at Amelia, shaking her head as if trying to wake from a dream. "I can't believe it," she said for the 10th time. "I really can't believe it. You were so calm, so strong, just like him." When they got back to the apartment, Carol walked over to the photograph of her father. She picked it up, tracing the outline of his jaw with her finger. "I was always so afraid of that part of him," she said softly, her voice thick with memory. "The warrior. He'd come home from his deployments, and he'd be different, quieter, more distant. I saw what the fighting did to him. The cost. I didn't want that for you. That's why I never talked about it. Why I never wanted you to get too close to his world." "It's not about fighting, Mom," Amelia said, coming to stand beside her. "He taught me that. It's about not needing to fight." "But you did fight," Carol said, turning to face her, her eyes searching her daughter's. "What if you had really hurt that boy? What if you had lost control?" "I was always in control," Amelia said with a certainty that was absolute. "That was the first lesson. Control your breath. Control your body. Control your fear. The rest is just movement." Carol looked at her 14-year-old daughter and saw, for the first time, the woman she was becoming. She was not just Carol's quiet, bookish child. She was Daniel Peterson's granddaughter. She carried his strength, his discipline, his unwavering moral compass. And Carol realized that in trying to protect Amelia from the world, she had underestimated her daughter's ability to protect herself. A wave of pride, fierce and overwhelming, washed away the last of her fear. She pulled Amelia into a hug, holding her tight. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered into her daughter's hair. "Your grandfather would be, too." Monday at Northgate Prep was a surreal experience. The story of what happened in the principal's office had spread through the student body like wildfire. As Amelia walked down the hallway, the usual dynamic was gone. No one snickered. No one looked away. Instead, they stared. The whispers followed her everywhere. "That's her. That's Amelia Vance. I heard she broke Brett Thompson's arm with one finger. My dad said her grandfather was a war hero. Like a real one. Did you see Brett? He looks terrified of her." She was no longer invisible. She was a myth, a legend in the making. Some students looked at her with awe, others with fear. A few of the girls who had always ignored her now offered shy, hesitant smiles. A group of freshman boys practically parted like the Red Sea when she walked past. Amelia hated it. She had traded one kind of prison for another. Before, she was the invisible maid's daughter, an object of pity or scorn. Now, she was the karate black belt war hero's granddaughter, an object of fear and fascination. Neither was her. Both were labels created by others, masks that hid the real Amelia Vance. All she wanted was to be left alone, to read her books and live in peace. Brett was a ghost of his former self. He shuffled through the halls with his head down, his sling a prominent badge of his defeat. His cronies, Chad and Kyle, kept their distance from him, as if his humiliation were contagious. They no longer met Amelia's eyes. They didn't meet anyone's eyes. Their power, which had been borrowed from Brett, was gone. In the afternoon, true to the principal's word, Brett appeared in the main lobby after school. He held a bucket and a mop, his expression sullen. Carol was there, quietly going about her work, a new air of confidence in her posture. She didn't gloat. She didn't even speak to him unless necessary. She simply pointed to the supply closet and then to the floor. "Start in that corner," she said, her voice professional and even. "Work your way across. And don't miss any spots." Amelia watched from a distance for a few minutes. She saw Brett clumsily slosh water on the floor, his movements awkward and resentful. He was a king forced to scrub the floors of his own castle, and the irony was not lost on anyone who happened to walk by. But Amelia felt no pleasure in his punishment. It was just another consequence. A logical outcome. The real trouble, she suspected, had not yet begun. Mr. Thompson was not a man who would accept public humiliation. He was a snake, and snakes do not forget. They retreat into the grass, wait, and choose a better moment to strike. Her suspicion proved correct a week later. It started subtly. Carol's work hours were changed. She was moved from the day shift to the late-night shift, from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The official reason given by the contracting company was staffing reorganization. It meant Carol now had to take 2 buses late at night and come home exhausted just as Amelia was waking up. They barely saw each other. Then, a complaint was filed. An anonymous report about Carol leaving cleaning chemicals unsecured. It was a baseless accusation. Carol was obsessively careful, but it resulted in a formal write-up in her file. One more write-up, she was told, and she would be terminated. Amelia knew, with a certainty that settled like a cold stone in her stomach, that this was the work of Charles Thompson. He couldn't attack Amelia directly. Her grandfather's name was a shield. So he was attacking the person she had defended, her mother. He was coming at her from the side, through back channels and anonymous complaints, using his money and influence to squeeze them, to make their lives miserable until they broke. It was a more sophisticated form of bullying, but it was bullying all the same. And it was far more dangerous than a clumsy lunge in a hallway. One evening, Amelia found her mother slumped at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, a letter from their landlord on the table in front of her. "What is it, Mom?" Amelia asked, her heart sinking. "The rent," Carol said, her voice muffled. "They're raising it. 30%. Effective next month. They say it's market rate adjustments." Amelia picked up the letter. The building was owned by a large property management corporation. A corporation she was sure, with a little digging, would have Charles Thompson on its board of directors. "We can't afford this," Carol whispered, her voice cracking. "With my hours cut back, we can't afford this. We're going to be evicted, Amelia." There it was. The snake's final strike. Not a direct attack, but a slow, methodical strangulation. He was taking away her mother's job, their home, their stability. He was going to push them out of Northgate, out of the city, ruin them quietly and legally. Amelia looked at her mother's defeated face. She saw the despair in her eyes. The same woman who had found her voice in the principal's office was now being silenced by the crushing weight of money and power. And Amelia felt something she had not felt in the lobby that day. Not the cold certainty of a warrior. Not the calm focus of a disciplined mind. She felt anger. A deep, slow-burning rage. It was the righteous anger her grandfather had warned her about. The kind that demanded action. The kind that could be a weapon if you let it. You don't draw a weapon unless you intend to use it, his voice echoed in her mind. She took a slow, deliberate breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She controlled the anger, packed it down, forged it from a raging fire into a single, sharp point of steel. This was no longer about a scuffed floor or a schoolyard bully. This was about justice. This was about survival. Charles Thompson had crossed a line, and Amelia Vance was going to make him wish he never had. She went to her room and opened the wooden box under her bed. She took out her grandfather's dog tags and slipped the chain over her head. The cool metal felt heavy against her chest, a tangible link to the man who had prepared her for this moment her entire life. She didn't know how she was going to fight a man like Charles Thompson. He didn't operate in a world of physical threats. His weapons were contracts, lawyers, and loopholes. She couldn't strike her way out of a lease agreement. She couldn't block a pink slip. But her grandfather had taught her more than just karate. He had taught her strategy. He had taught her to study her opponent, to find their weaknesses, to use their own strength against them. Men like Charles Thompson, she reasoned, had one primary weakness: their reputation. Their public image was everything. They built a fortress of respectability around themselves to hide the dirty work they did in the shadows. To defeat him, she would have to tear down that fortress. She would have to bring his actions out of the shadows and into the light. She didn't have money or lawyers, but she had a story, and she had the name of a hero to make people listen. The next day, she didn't go to school. She told her mother she was feeling sick. Once Carol had left for her new, grueling shift, Amelia sat down at their small kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. She began to write. She wrote down everything that had happened, starting with Brett's first snide comment in history class. She described the constant, low-level harassment. She detailed the scene in the lobby, the mud on the floor, the threat, her response. She wrote about the meeting in the principal's office, about Mr. Thompson's initial rage and his sudden, calculated retreat when her grandfather's name was mentioned. Then she documented the aftermath. Her mother's changed hours. The bogus complaint. The sudden, impossible rent hike. She connected the dots, drawing a clear, undeniable line from the Thompsons' public humiliation to their secret, vicious revenge. She wrote for hours, her language simple, clear, and brutally honest. She didn't embellish. She didn't overdramatize. She just told the truth. The story was powerful enough on its own. When she was done, she had a 10-page, handwritten account. It was a witness statement, a declaration. It was her weapon. Now she had to figure out how to use it. She thought about going to the principal, but his power was limited to the school grounds. This battle was bigger than that. She thought about going to the police, but what was the crime? Corporate retaliation and predatory landlord practices were scummy, but not illegal. She needed a bigger arena, a court of public opinion. She remembered a local news reporter, a woman named Susan Miller, who had done a big story a few years back on the dedication of the Sergeant Major Peterson Memorial Highway. She had interviewed veterans who had served with him. She had spoken with deep respect for his legacy. Susan Miller, Amelia thought, might be someone who would listen. Finding her was easy. A quick search on the library computer brought up her email address at the local TV station. Amelia took her handwritten pages and typed them into an email. She read it over and over, checking for any errors. Her finger hovered over the send button for a long time. This was the point of no return. Once she sent this, the war with Charles Thompson would be declared openly. Their lives would be turned upside down. There was no telling how he would react. She looked at the picture of her grandfather on the table. She saw the kindness in his eyes, but also the resolve. Courage is not the absence of fear, Mia, he used to say. It's being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. She clicked send. The reply came less than an hour later. Subject: the granddaughter of Sergeant Major Daniel Peterson. Dear Amelia, I remember your grandfather well. I would be honored to hear your story. Can you and your mother meet me tomorrow? Sincerely, Susan Miller. The battle was joined. The meeting took place in a small, quiet coffee shop far from Northgate. Susan Miller was a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She listened to their story without interruption, her pen gliding across her notepad. Carol, nervous at first, found her voice as she described the subtle campaign of harassment, the fear of losing her job, and the terror of the eviction notice. Amelia sat quietly beside her, a pillar of calm, answering Susan's occasional questions with direct, factual clarity. She provided copies of the rent increase notice and the work complaint. When they were finished, Susan put her pen down. She looked from Carol's worried face to Amelia's steady gaze. Charles Thompson is a powerful man, Susan said, her voice grave. He's connected all over this city. When this story airs, he will fight back. He will try to discredit you. Are you prepared for that? It was Carol who answered, her voice trembling but resolute. We have nothing left to lose. He's already trying to take everything. All we have left is the truth. Susan Miller nodded slowly. The truth, she said, a glimmer of steel in her eyes, and the name of Sergeant Major Daniel Peterson. Mr. Thompson picked a fight with the wrong family. The story aired 3 days later on the 6 o'clock news. It was the lead segment. It began with the heroic, formal portrait of Sergeant Major Peterson, his chest full of medals. Then, it cut to an image of the eviction notice. Susan Miller's narration was devastating in its simplicity. She laid out the facts, one by one. The bullying, the confrontation, the meeting in the principal's office, and the sudden, crippling retaliation against the hero's family. She interviewed a shell-shocked Principal Thompson, who confirmed the events at the school. She interviewed the head of a local veterans association, who expressed his outrage. She showed the Thompson donor plaque in the lobby, contrasting it with the humble plaque for Amelia's grandfather. The story was an explosion. Charles Thompson had built his world in the protected corridors of wealth and influence. Amelia, with Susan Miller's help, had just dragged him into the court of public opinion, and the verdict was instantaneous and brutal. The fallout was immediate. The TV station was flooded with calls. Veterans groups organized a protest outside Thompson's law firm. The firm's other partners, horrified by the scandal, held an emergency meeting and parted ways with him by the next morning. The board of the property management company that owned Amelia's building issued a public apology, fired the building manager who signed the rent increase, and offered Carol a new 1-year lease at their current rate. At Northgate, The board of trustees convened. By the end of the week, the large, gleaming Thompson family donor plaque was quietly removed from the lobby wall. Brett Thompson was withdrawn from the school. His future of easy privilege had been shattered, not by a physical blow, but by the weight of his own cruelty. A week later, Carol received a call from Principal Thompson. The school's contracted cleaning service had been put under review. The board had created a new, salaried position for a facilities coordinator, and they were offering it to her. It came with better pay, regular daytime hours, and health benefits. That evening, the apartment was quiet. The fear that had lived with them for so long was finally gone, replaced by a sense of profound, exhausted peace. Amelia stood in the lobby of the now-empty school, waiting for her mother to finish her last shift as a cleaner. She looked at the polished marble floor, no longer a symbol of her mother's servitude, but a testament to her resilience. She walked over to the wall where her grandfather's plaque hung. It was small and understated, but it seemed to shine brighter now that the gaudy one next to it was gone. She heard footsteps and turned to see her mother approaching, not in her blue work smock, but in her regular coat, holding a simple cardboard box with her personal effects from the janitor's closet. Carol stopped beside her, and they both looked at the plaque. "He would be so proud, Mia," Carol said, her voice soft. Amelia reached up and touched the cool metal of the dog tags under her shirt. She had faced down a bully, but she had defeated a tyrant without throwing a single punch. Her grandfather had taught her how to fight, but he had also taught her that the greatest battles are won not with the fists, but with the mind and the heart. He had given her a legacy not of violence, but of unwavering honor. Standing there, in the quiet hall, she was no longer the invisible maid's daughter or the feared karate prodigy. She was Amelia Vance, and for the first time, in the silence, she felt truly seen. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.